Thank you, Clive. Let me open the meeting in the traditional way. And today's meeting is a combination. We are starting with our quarterly business meeting, which unsurprisingly we hold every 3 months. But we hope to dispatch the business fairly quickly so that we can hear our speaker, who has a very interesting topic to talk to us about. So if I can commence the business meeting by asking just the members present if they have received the agenda that was sent to them recently. If anybody hasn't received the papers, then please email our administrator Nikki, or send a chat message to Nikki so that that can be corrected. Otherwise, the business we wanted to talk about are the papers that were circulated, any matters arising, and that's about it for today. I'd like to start with the agenda, which I will now need to locate, and start to go through the various reports. If anybody has a comment to make on a report, please do let me know. So we have the Second Vice President's report, which is about Rotary. We've received it. Are there any observations on it, or shall we move on? The next report is from the Treasurer. Now, the Treasurer has supplied us with his very rapidly produced, after the end of the year, accounts. I do not propose to discuss the accounts today because, well, for 2 reasons really. There's an awful lot of that for us to look at. And we approve these at a special general meeting later in the year. So there'll be plenty of time to investigate and ask questions later. But Hugh, could I ask you to give your report, please?
Okay, thank you, Mark. Well, I do trust you find all the information I've sent out self-explanatory. However, the President has asked, David has asked me to highlight maybe the effect of COVID-19 on our finances. Well, when we prepared our budget in May, we anticipated some savings, and we didn't know how the pandemic was going to go. We thought perhaps we'd be back in the Chesterfield by September, maybe October. So on that basis, we dropped the subscription for this year by £20 to recognise those savings. Yeah. Now, if I take the first 9 months of this year, we're still the rest of this month to go. Now, in terms of the financial effect and how it affects our bank account at the moment, we would have saved some £500, and that would have been because of speakers and admin expenses. However, against that, our charity contributions for the first 3 months would have been £1,500. So if I take the savings of £500 away from what our contribution would have been, we've got a shortfall of income of £1,000. Now, all that's been added to the charity fund in these 2 months, frankly, is only £350. And if I had the 146 brought forward from last year, £500. So in income terms, we're £1,004 short. So please, we don't have a charity tray every Monday at the moment, but we have a bank account and we have a charity account. You have those bank numbers. Please, may I appeal to you? We have got charities that are in much need of our help. And can I ask you that perhaps the contributions you would otherwise have made, the savings you are making up for not coming to Rotary, perhaps you could make some contribution to the charity fund in respect of these. Now, obviously, as we move forward, the savings will depend on what events we have. If we have Christmas, then there won't be so many savings. But if we don't have a Christmas lunch this year, the savings could maybe be up to £1,000, £1,600. But any savings arising from the cost savings, I can assure you, will go to our much needed charities. President David, that's my short report on 19.
Thank you, Hugh. And I'd like to introduce my President's report, if you like, at this point. Following up from my newsletter, Hugh mentioned we had a shortfall on charities. And I would ask every member to consider whether they could make a donation, either the usual donation or bearing in mind the fact they haven't had to travel into London, pay for lunch and so on and so forth, which Tim reckoned was £50 per head per week. So any contribution would be appreciated. Now, it's sometimes difficult to give money if you don't know what you're giving it for. And we have said we will support children's charities, but we haven't been specific about those. Presently, I'd like to develop that thought. We have three initiatives at the moment. We have the work being done by Community and Vocational Committee, and they're working to support all the existing charities that we've supported previously, and to make sure that we don't forget any of the people who've we've helped in the past. Their need is greater now than it was in the past, so we would like to do more, not less. And so C&V charities for children, there were hospices and various charities we've supported in the last year. The second is my Duke of Edinburgh's Award charity, which is for 14-year-olds to help disadvantaged children get the benefits of the Duke of Edinburgh's Award experience. Those of you that have been through it will know that it can do a great deal to develop a young person's life and their ability to lead and support a community. And thirdly, and most recently, we've been asked and we've agreed to support Beirut. There were various Rotary International, Rotary RWWII Rotary clubs doing something to support Beirut. In particular, we've had a request to support a paediatric hospital in Beirut. And I'd ask you to consider giving money through our charity, because we get the benefit of gift aid on whatever you give, to Beirut. And I'd ask you to make a payment to our charity, to you and to our charity. And if you like, to market either Beirut, C&V or DOV, if you have a particular preference for one or other of those. And that is my charity appeal for the week. More of those later. Thank you. Could I move on now to, we've had a report from the administrator, a very extensive report. I'm sure that you've all read with great interest. I'd just like to thank Nikki for all the work she's been doing on that. Are there any questions on Nikki's report? I'm not going to give you too long to make up your mind. Communications from Chicago, who has been doing 3 jobs and trying to help us as well over the last month or so. And she's been very personally busy, but she's kept us going. Chicago, thank you for that. If there are any questions on Chicago's report. I'll move on to community and vocational. Isabella's report, once again, an extensive report. And I think at the moment, Isabella would like to have any direct help she can, but in particular, any contributions you can make towards her particular flyer that she put out. I hope we're all putting money in the jar as we observe washing our hands and so on frequently. I think a penny is not going to take us far, so I hope it's a bit more than that. But please support Isabella and her work for community and vocational. Are there any questions on that? Thank you. Compliance.
Yes,
sorry, yes, of course.
You
Sorry,
mentioned the 3 causes which you'd like some money sent to. And the one for C&V is a bit vague because, as far as I know, that committee is not specifically giving to any particular children's charity at the moment. I'd love to give to children's charity, but need a little bit more information as to which way the C&V are going.
Well, in her report, you will see, Harry, that she has listed the charities we've supported in the past year. And the intention is to support all those charities. Until we know how much money we've got, we can't get into the detail allocating funds to one or the other. We'd rather give a reasonable sum to one than a negligible sum to 6. So we need to raise the money and then we can allocate it. So if you trust C&V to do the allocation job, please support the children's charities.
Okay, thank you very much for explaining that.
Compliance, we have had a GDPR update from Olivia, but is there anything to add, Olivia? If I can move on, Foundation, anything to add, Rajiv?
Only to say that we still await news from all the 5 scholars, and I should hear by the end of this month, well, we hope to hear by the end of this month, on when they come and if they come.
Okay, thank you. Hiko, I assume you're still in Tokyo. You're sat there behind your camera, and I don't suppose you've had a lot of opportunity to liaise with district. But if you have anything to observe, then please let us know. Do you have anything to observe at the moment?
Only thing, well, most of the events being cancelled, and the only things that are a district conference will be on I think is virtual, so it's not easier to attend this year, but unfortunately it's not physical. And that's on the schedule that I know.
Thank you. I know certain chairs have had the invitation to prepare presentations for the conference, but I think more of that later. The House, we had a report from House. They're helping with a lunch and a committee and a council meeting in a fortnight's time. Whether or not we can proceed with a lunch and so on will depend on government guidelines at the time. But we're very keen to get back into some formal hybrid pattern as soon as we can, subject always to meeting all the requirements for safety and observing the various risk factors that are clearly evident at the moment. And certainly we don't require any member to do anything with which they feel uncomfortable. That's why we're trying to move to a hybrid circumstance. But we are also aware that there are many of our members who are disenfranchised because they, for one reason or another, don't access the Zoom systems. And so they're not getting any benefits at the moment from the club. If I can move on to international, is any observations on international? I think No said there was no change. Membership, Clive, do you want to say a word about membership?
Yes, I just have to add to my report, since it was written, Euros Synergy has tendered his resignation from the club. So he wants to move on to other things. He only joined us last November, but there we are, that's his choice. I have to say though, he did pay his full subscription for this year.
Okay. We're having no special events at the moment. I don't know, is Duchess on the call?
She is, she's here.
Okay. If you've nothing to add, Duchess, I will move on. Speakers, I think we've all seen the work being done by Anthony and Janet, and included in the circulation of today's meeting, for example, there is a list of upcoming speakers, which I think every one of which is worthy of your time and attention. And I hope to see you next week. I know that Varsi would like me to ensure your attendance for her International Peace Day on the 21st of September. She has 4 fantastic speakers, and it is an opportunity for us to extend our view of the world, and I think that will help us, and with a little bit of optimism it might also help the world. Thank you. Sports, we have a report on sports, if there's no comments, and youth. I think Robert, you're waiting for schools to return, and if there's any, do you have any other observation on that?
David, just one thing on speakers. Hello?
Yeah. Sorry, Anthony. Yeah.
I just one thing.
Yeah.
The speaker for the 16th of November, which was to have been Michael Finn, will not now. Instead, we've got a Professor David Wolf, who's going to be speaking either on how to make an atomic bomb or the disasters at Chernobyl, or combination of the two. Could be an explosive subject.
Okay. Thank you. That's the 16th of September.
November.
Well, no, of November. Sorry, 16th of November. So I was trying to get the date sorted in my head. Yeah, in November. As you say, it could be on both topics.
Yeah.
Right. So if I could move on to, thank you, Duchess, for saying you've got nothing to add. If I could move on to any other business, this really is where I ask the members present if they have any observations they would like to make about the activities of the club. Bearing in mind that any long questions won't actually benefit the club if we delay the speaker too much. Are there any observations from the members? This is your opportunity to raise them with members of council.
Don't see any hands raised on my list here, David.
We do seem to be a satisfied lot, don't we? Mind you, these are the people who are attending Zoom meetings, and of course we're not communicating with the members who aren't able to do that. Okay, so I'd like now to move on. Actually, before I move on, under the Treasurer's report, I missed the item where we actually have to elect an auditor. We had difficulties with this last year because our nominee happened to be our President, Tim, who was disqualified by our bylaws from actually being both the auditor and the President. And so I would like a nomination, a proposer, if you like, for the only name I've had put in front of me, which is for Mrs. Slawson, FCCA, as auditor. Do I have a proposer, Hugh?
Yeah, I propose.
Okay. Do I have a seconder?
I'm happy to second Sangeeta, yes.
Thank you. So thank you, Vice President Ian, and thank you, Past President Hugh. Now, voting is not easy, but could I ask for all those in favour to put up their hands, and we'll do it on a general numbers, hopefully, rather than a specific count. All members. More importantly, are there any members to the contrary?
I see none to the contrary,
carried.
President David.
Thank you. Thank you, Clive. The motion is carried, and I'd ask the Honorary Secretary to communicate with the newly elected auditor. Right, now I'd like to welcome visitors. We have a lot of international visitors, and I'd perhaps ask Clive if he could, who's had a better view of the screens,
yes,
if he could take us through.
Can I tell you, President David and everybody, that we have visitors today from Nigeria, the USA, Bangladesh, India, the Philippines, and South Africa. Wow. Oh, well, yes, we've got Elaine and Clive from hello, Clive. Good to see you. Thank you.
So would you all like to say hello briefly to the club?
Yeah, as you go.
Hello.
You'd like to unmute yourself. Hello. And Nagari?
Adrian Simons from Golders Green.
Good to see you, Adrian.
Shahadat from Bangladesh.
Good to see you from Bangladesh. Welcome.
And this is Gerhard Kensington Chelsea, but I'm calling from Austria.
Oh, are you? Oh, well done, Gerhard. Yeah. Excellent.
Jeff Kivalramani from India. How are you doing?
Yeah, Zen has got back to the Philippines, and we're pleased to see him.
Good afternoon. Wangarengare from Kenya.
Good to see you. We're welcome.
Thank you.
Yes, we're.
Elaine and Clive from the Rotary Club of Elstree and Boreham Wood. The full title. It's rather long-winded, I'm afraid.
That's fine.
Hollywood of the UK.
Leonard, good to see you.
Yes.
Thank you, David.
Rotary Club of London St Henry. Greetings to you.
Yes.
Nice to see you.
Thank you very much, Ghazala. Thank you. Particularly pleased to see you, Ghazala, because of our earlier communication today about Beirut. Thank you.
Yes, I'm very passionate.
Assistant Governor Ken from Rotary Club of Chingford. Good to see you all.
Good to see you, Ken.
Yeah, good to see you, Ken.
Nahid is with us again this week.
From Westminster International.
Good. And we have Inga with us again today from Norway. Good to see you.
Yeah, good afternoon. This is Vijay Keval Ramani from India. I am here with my colleague Pratik Vidwan from my club.
Thank you.
Hello everyone. This is Rotarian past President Pratik Vidwan from India 3142. Thank you.
Good to see you. Thank you.
It really is good to see you all, and particularly our overseas visitors. I would encourage you, if you have limited number of meetings you can attend with us, to consider the 21st of September when we have our International Peace Meeting. Thank you for that. Now, it's one of the not frequent enough experienced pleasures of a president to be able to induct a new member. But today I have that pleasure. And it's my privilege, as well as my pleasure, to welcome into membership of our club today Abayomi Akinyele, who has been proposed by our membership chair, Clive Amos, and his proposal has been reviewed by both the council and the membership in accordance with our constitution and bylaws. And now I'd ask Clive if he would say a few words about our new member.
Thank you, President David.
Clive.
Yes, I am delighted to have the privilege and pleasure of proposing and introducing a new member to our club. Abayomi Akinyele comes originally from Nigeria. He studied in Nigeria. He had a degree from Lagos State University, and he also has a degree from the University of Coventry. He has an interesting occupation in that he runs a college for beauty therapy and massage, and I believe he also has another interest from my conversation with him. He came to us via the web. He contacted us through seeing something about us on our website. We're always pleased to welcome anybody who comes along. Just to make it clear to everybody else, we do go through the whole procedure for the appointment of people. It's not just a question, oh, we're working online, so we just tick them. We have the application forms, their CVs, which go to the council. That's after I have had a conversation and interviewed the particular applicant, which I did with Abayomi, and I was delighted to recommend him to council. And following the due process, after 10 days, nobody had anything to say why he shouldn't be admitted as a member. And so therefore, President David, I have the utmost delight in presenting to you Abayomi Akinyele for induction as a member of the Rotary Club of London.
Thank you, Clive. Abayomi, we now proceed to admit you into membership in the Rotary Club of London, and so to the fellowship of Rotary throughout the world. 1.2 million neighbours in 35,000 different clubs. Our particular club, we think, is a special club. If I show you our family tree, which is behind me on the wall here, we were formed in 2011, and we've generated, I think, 129 subsidiary, well, not subsidiary, but we've helped sponsor 129 new clubs since our own formation, two of which, Margate and Southgate, I think, become 100 years next year. So we've been in this business quite a long time. We enjoy it, and we hope you will enjoy it as much as the present members do. Our mission is to provide service to others, promote integrity, and advance world understanding, goodwill and peace through our fellowship of business, professional, and community leaders. It's been explained to you that the ideal of Rotary is service. Our principal motto is service above self. And the object of this club and all Rotary clubs is to encourage and foster this ideal as a basis of worthy enterprise. You are to share in this effort. You have been approved for membership in this club because we believe you are a worthy representative of your vocation, which it must be both a pleasure and a duty to communicate to all of us. We have a duty to know what your business is, and you have a duty to make sure we know what your business is. So if there is an opportunity for reciprocal benefit, we don't miss it. You have agreed to accept the obligations attached to your membership in this club and to obey the club's constitution and bylaws. Fellow Rotarians, I'm happy to present to you a Rotarian Akinlei to membership of the club. Can we congratulate Akinlei,
Abiyomi.
Abiyomi in a normal manner. Can you unmute us briefly, Clive?
I will do. Yeah.
Abiyomi, would you like to say a few words?
You are unmuted. Your camera is on. You like to speak? You should come up on the screen. Oh dear. Well, anyway, we welcome you. I think, President David, we'll have to move on.
Yes, so we'll move on, Abiyomi, and perhaps we have a word towards the end of the meeting if you can sort your microphone out. Thank you. Now we have another pleasure of the President is to congratulate a member on achieving a birthday. And this week, on the 11th of September, it's the birthday of Adrian Fenderson. I don't know whether Adrian's with us. If he's not with us, it will save us. No, so it will save him suffering our singing. I'd now like to move on to the further important business of the day, which is our speaker. But we'll commence first with a toast. It's been traditional in this club to give a toast at the end of the meal before the speaker. It was at the end of the meal because, but as soon as we could in a meeting, because it always used to be that you couldn't smoke until you'd given the royal toast. So please put your glass in hand, those of you who are willing to do so, and let us toast Her Majesty the Queen.
The Queen.
The Queen.
Thank you.
President, I have an ominous report for you today before you get into your speaker, please.
Okay, sorry, Harry, we should have taken that under reports, yeah.
Well, I didn't want to mix it up with the, QBM.
No.
Shall I go ahead?
Okay.
May I
go ahead, yeah.
Okay, fine.
Yeah, please.
Firstly, Caroline Muir, who has gone through a knee replacement, which I believe is very painful. She's back home, and thank you for Vasi for mentioning this. Apparently she is joining us on Zoom today. I don't know if you've seen her there, but just to let you know, she is recovering well and is at home. So that's the first one.
Thank you.
Secondly, I'm afraid to have to let you know that John Buchanan, past President John Buchanan, is in hospital. He's in University College Hospital, and I've been in touch with Mary on 2 or 3 occasions. We hope he'll be home soon, but at the moment he's in hospital. Spent a very frustrating weekend there because you can't do anything. He doesn't have his iPad there. But that's the situation as far as John is concerned. I also have to thank past President Vasi, who has finally found our past President Ralph Land, who's been missing for some while. I've made several attempts to get hold of him. Apparently he has returned to London from the West Country and is now living back at home in Fulham. And we're going to try and see if we can get him more involved. But just to let you know, we have managed to find him. And finally, our number one, Albert Kuntz. I've spoken to Martin and Marianne Fingers again, who have written to me from Holland. They've spoken to him. He's having physio 3 times a week. Remember, he's very elderly, And when they asked how he was, he said, "Durchzogen," which apparently means so and so, so. So that's my report for you.
Thank you very much indeed, Harry, and thank you for making sure I didn't forget to call on you.
Okay, thank you.
But now we move on. Now we move on to our speaker for the day, Helen Fry. Now, Helen has spoken to us on previous occasions, and we are very, very pleased to have her back. Her timing, or our timing, is particularly good. I don't know whether you, those of you that took a broadsheet Sunday paper yesterday, you would have seen, or you could have seen, a review of her latest book. I'll just read a little bit from the review in the Times. And this is towards the end of a double-page article. Fry has undertaken prodigious research for her book, with much of her material coming from declassified files in the National Archives, as well as unpublished memoirs, biographies, private letters, and interviews with descendants of M19 personnel. The book is a fitting tribute to the hundreds of men and women who risked their lives in assisting Allied escapees, and a welcome salute to those who broke out of their POW camps that they might be returned to the battlefront. And I don't know whether Helen will thank me for giving you this information, but since yesterday's reviews, this morning, she found that on Amazon, she was top of the sales lists. That's worth a clap in itself. So Helen has published 25 books, or is it 26 now? I'm not sure. And we're so very pleased to have you with us, Helen. People can read your biography on our screens, but we're just so great. It's so great you can be with us to speak to us today. I'll hand over to you now.
Thank you, Mr. President, and to members and your guests today. You know, I'm delighted to be back, and I know it's not in person, but thank you, because this story I'm going to talk about today is significant in terms of the Second World War, and it's one, I suppose you can really call it the forgotten Secret Service of World War II, because what I'm going to talk about today in the 20 minutes that I've got is about this branch of military intelligence called MI9. And I always kind of chuckle really, because MI9, it's like 6 upside down. I don't think that's necessarily significant, but of course there were lots of branches of military intelligence that have now closed down, but some, of course, most famous, MI5 and MI6, are most certainly still functioning today, and we know about those. But what about MI9? Well, MI9 was formed in the early part of the war, in December 1939, to deal with intelligence from prisoners of war. And some of you, I recognize your faces from before, will have heard my other talk. I talked about the walls have ears. And this was also a branch of MI9, which later, as you said, David, became part of MI19 when it became so big. That branch bugged the conversations of German prisoners of war, most particularly, of course, in captivity, the German generals. And the information they got, as I argued then, turned the tide of the war. But there was another branch of military intelligence of MI9 that dealt with our prisoners. And it's really interesting, the philosophy behind MI9, because we did not abandon Allied airmen and soldiers. We did not abandon Commonwealth personnel. The Americans had a similar branch, identical, but they called it MIS-X, but it did the same stuff as MI9. So when I'm talking about MI9 today, bear in mind that the Americans are doing a counterpart to this, the same thing. But its actual head, Norman Crockett, coined the phrase escape-mindedness. And a lot of the escape stories have gone into our consciousness in a number of ways. Of course, The Great Escape, that wonderful film, based on reality, on the Great Escape from Stalag Luft 3, which is near Saargen in Germany. And also, of course, Colditz, the impenetrable fortress from which, of course, the Nazis believed it was impossible to escape. Oh, that's quite a challenge for those of the soldiers and airmen, well, the airmen inside, the officers inside, for escape. So those have become immortalised, I suppose, in our consciousness, but also the gadgets. And so MI9 was involved in all aspects which could support our personnel to evade capture. So if they're shot down over enemy territory and they manage to go into hiding, that there are escape lines and support for them, that they are not forgotten. And also, of course, those who are already taken prisoner. And what we mustn't forget is that after the evacuation of Dunkirk in May, June 1914, we remember the little fishing boats that took around 300,000 personnel back to Britain as the German and Nazi forces were sweeping across Europe. 50,000 British soldiers were left behind. And I actually found that staggering. And of course, this was a problem for MI9. 50,000 actually went into prisoner of war camps and 5,000 just went into hiding. So it was MI9's role to try and get them back. And by the end of the war, all but 300 of those had made it back, thanks to MI9, one way or another. So it is there to support in aspects of escape and evasion, which meant at 2 or 3 of its secret sites, it would give training to personnel before they went into action. And of course, once a prisoner has been captured, they could be disorientated, confused, even injured. And in those moments, they might not think logically. And so MI9's training program in escape and evasion, I have to say it was quite fun reading some of these now declassified lectures, and it's really about how to blend into enemy territory. Don't walk in a British way, for example. Don't walk with a stick, which is a very British thing to do. Wear a beret if you're in occupied France. But one of my favourite stories, I'm just going to give you some highlights in the time I've got today. It's sort of, yeah, some of it's quite kind of quintessentially British thinking, I guess. But there was one airman actually that cycled. He managed to escape from a prisoner of war camp, and his example's given in the MI9 training lectures. He managed to cycle 400 kilometres across Western Europe, occupied Europe, right under the nose of the Nazis. He made it until he came to a roundabout. And he cycled round the wrong way. And the local policeman looked and said, hang on a minute, was he cycled round the wrong way? Because he got picked up and sent back to a prisoner of war camp. So it's ordinary little things like this. And the whole MI9 history is full of wonderful stuff like this, stories like this. And of course, a very dangerous, in some cases, escape stories. The gadgets, what's known as Q gadgets. We think maybe that Ian Fleming has done a grand job with his James Bond gadgets and, you know, exploding cars and pens and goodness knows what else. But I was amazed when I started research a decade or so ago on these particular stories that a lot of the early gadgets, they're in the MI9 files. Fleming, who was linked to MI9 through the Naval Intelligence Division, he worked with MI9 personnel. He's basically lifted, well, quite legitimately, but he's taken the ideas of these gadgets from MI9 files. And one of the most useful, of course, were the miniature compasses. And there was a particular chap, Christopher Clayton Hutton, along with another chap, Charles Fraser Smith, and they were really the two guys that were to think of what MI9 needed, how it could be achieved, and how it could be sent into prisoner of war camps. So the miniature compasses, not been done before, they were hidden behind buttons, and they would unscrew the wrong way, well, I say the wrong way to us, counterintuitively, and they were not discovered. So, of course, you know, if you're captured, you've got your uniform, you've got an escape compass on you. Quite often they were hidden in shaving brushes. So as long as personnel could keep their shaving kit, they had a compass. And there were all sorts of other things that were smuggled into Monopoly games, chess sets. some of the maps were really important, the MI9 maps, and these were printed on silk or tissue. What I find incredible about the maps is the detail of the printing. They couldn't, you know, print on traditional paper because of course it's quite thick and it rustles and it can't be hidden. So airmen and soldiers might need the help of a map of the area which they're going into operations in case of being captured, so for escape or evasion. And so we have MI9 maps for any aspect where MI9 operated, and that included, yes, of course, Western Europe, Greece, Balkans, Far East, and the Middle East. So quite extraordinary range, and they had all sorts of innovative ways of adding stuff to the ink so that it is literally no blurring of the lines, very tiny, incredibly detailed maps. The tissue maps could be folded up quite small, even into pieces on a board game. So ingenious ways to send escape devices into prisoner of war camps. And from what we can tell, MI9 were really, with the Americans of course, were really the only forces that had this whole idea of escape-mindedness. The Germans didn't seem to have an equivalent, and certainly, I mean, the Germans used coded messages, yes, into prisoner of war camps, coded letters and stuff, but they didn't seem to have the gadgets. But of course, MI9's work, that's all very well, but you've got to get the airmen and soldiers out from occupied areas, often in through neutral countries, but you've got to get them out. And this is where the escape lines come in, and you've probably heard a lot about the escape lines. But for me, the story, and I'm talking about Western Europe now, the story of ordinary people of all ages risking their lives for the Allies is, well, beyond inspirational. So to give you an example, I was very lucky to interview a 97-year-old veteran. She's one of the last surviving members of what was the Comet Line. The Comet Line ran from Brussels right across Nazi-occupied France, through Paris, right under the noses of the Nazis, down to the Pyrenees, where there was another family, the de Grief family, were coordinating. They were also a Belgian family. The whole family was involved. And of course, they had couriers and guides and helpers to smuggle airmen and soldiers over the Pyrenees. And it's no mean feat. I don't know, I haven't climbed the Pyrenees. I don't know if any of you have, but it is no mean feat. And of course, they had to find routes out that were not going to be discovered. So they would use tiny donkey trails or even new routes out in quite difficult terrain. Also escape lines from Italy into Switzerland, very challenging, for example. So I interviewed Elsie Marshall, and she was just 16 years old and still at school when she helped, and her whole family helped, with the Comet Line. Extraordinary story, but devastating in that November 1942, as with some of the other escape lines, they were betrayed. Her father didn't make it. She and her mother, and there were others who didn't make it. As a result of this betrayal, 100 members of the Comet Line were rounded up and disappeared and shot. But her mother and herself, they were transported ultimately to Ravensbrück concentration camp. They had a horrendous time. Various prisons, Ravensbrück and Mauthausen. And I felt lucky to have the chance to ask her, why did you do it? You know, you could have just, certainly not collaborated with the Nazis, but you could have just gone on with your life, waited for the Allies to liberate. And she said to me something very interesting. She said, every day they were taking trains of food, and they were taking our food, our coal, our resources. We were on our knees. And she said, but most importantly, they took my Jewish friends. This is a bit I always find most moving when I interviewed her, and she said, you know, out with the Nazis. We thought, out with the Nazis, the fight for freedom above everything. And that spirit of defiance was still there. And I'm very grateful to her that now I can understand why thousands upon thousands across parts where MI9 operated helped the Allies. And the other interesting thing she said, we just assumed, she talks about MI9 quite freely, but she said, you know, during the wartime, we never knew what the organisation was called. We only knew that we were helping somebody, an organisation in London that was sending agents over, that was sending money and helping, supporting the escape lines, but we didn't know its name. And she said we didn't know it was MI9 until after the war, and the MI9 started to give out awards and compensate the helpers, etc., etc. And so I do find that extraordinary that the helpers were risking their lives, the leaders of the escape lines, and some of them were decimated by betrayal. They started up again, but you know, they were prepared to do that for an unnamed organisation, that level of trust. Another funny story from one of the escape stories. There's lots I could tell you, and then in the last 5 minutes I've got, I want to talk to you about the intelligence side of MI9. Airey Neave, of course, is very famous, a famous politician, assassinated by the IRA post-war, but he was the first British officer to escape from that fortress Colditz and successfully get back to Britain. How did he do it? Well, he and a Dutch officer walked out in German officer uniform that they'd made in the camp. And when I'm reading the camp history, the things that the prisoners got up to, MI9 told them, if it moves, nick it. And they did. And so you find that they're taking keys off guards if they're snoozing, or if workmen and copying them. If workmen have come in and they fix something in the camp, they nick the tools, dough from the bakery, you know, from the cookery, from the canteen, anything that they could make stuff from. And my favourite, I think, is that those that were tunnelling out, and it happened in several camps, those that were tunnelling out and they had to do it at night, well, what if they had a spot check by the guards? So they had to make a fake body in their bed. How did they do it? Pillows. Yeah, well, that's quite obvious. We know about the pillows, but you got to have an authentic head. So they made the head out of a pumpkin. And of course, the camps had a barber's, well, you don't call it a barber's shop, but barber's room. So they would take hair from the barber and paint the face. And it was so authentic that the guards never found out, even when they did a search. And you will know those wonderful stories of the prisoners tunnelling, you know, I'm going to say 6 foot down, 100 foot long at least, premature air conditioning units, extraordinary stuff. But the most important thing, again, it's psychology. While they're busy, and they also are busy making a nuisance of themselves to the guards, quite, you know, nothing malicious and nothing the guards could stick them in solitary confinement for, but keeping them active and busy kept them sane during their incarceration. And they got up to all sorts. And we can talk about that if you have any questions. But I want to just say a few words. I mean, it's just such a big topic, but I want to say a few words as conclusion, really. So one of the big breakthroughs that I made, which was quite, I suppose, accidental, but it's the point of doing thorough research. We've thought of MI9 as involved in escape and evasion. But what I've uncovered is that MI9 in its own right was an intelligence gathering organisation. And this now begins to change our understanding of what it was doing. And by the end of the war, it had saved 35,000 Allied personnel, an extraordinary legacy. And most of the escape and evasion reports on how they got back, by whatever means, survive. And of course, they've given a lot of information about things behind enemy lines, about German units, about defences, or if it's in the Far East, about stuff there and how to get out. But beyond that, the other thing, and this is my final point, and you can read in the book, it's now also engaged, it had a top secret section that was run first by Jimmy Langley, another famous escaper, and then Airey Neave. It had a top secret section called Room 900, and Room 900 was involved in counter-espionage, tracking German spies and agents on a par with MI6. And so for me, I think there's a lot that we can now look at and start beginning to see how this branch of MI9 actually was a major player in intelligence in the Second World War, as well as rescuing thousands of Allied airmen and soldiers to fight again. Thank you.
David.
Now, I'd like to call now on, thank you so much for that, Helen. It came to a rather an abrupt end, and I was waiting for your next sentence, but it is now my privilege to invite Anthony, who you know so well, to give you the vote of thanks.
Are we not having
Anthony.
questions? David, President David. Questions.
Sorry, I was going to do the questions afterwards. Yeah. No, you're quite right, Clive. Jumping to the end game. In that case, Clive, over to you.
Thank you. And I wonder if I may, unusually, if I just a minute, please. I wonder if I can unusually make the first comment. I was very interested in what you said about gadgets, and what came to mind was actually what you mentioned. I don't know if my father ever smoked a pipe. He was in the RAF in the Second World War, and I remember him showing me as a child this pipe, smoking pipe. You could take it to pieces, and inside was the tiniest little compass you've ever seen. It wasn't as big as the nail on my little finger, and I've always remembered that. And when you were talking, I thought, gadgets, I remember that gadget, and then of course you mentioned it. So forgive me if I took the first comment on that, and I'll be happy to take any questions. Brian, do I see you wanting to ask a question?
Hello, Clive, and hello, Speaker. Can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you, Brian.
Yeah, okay. I've been to Colditz, by the way, and which you may or may not know is a place that the Germans run for visitors from overseas. A most interesting thing, the guards apparently got on very well with the prisoners. It was quite a friendly place. And the officers, or mainly people there, they send officers, high-ranking people that they perhaps could use for other deals. But the most interesting thing to me is I have many, many German associates. Not one person has any knowledge of a camp called Colditz. It just is not part of their psyche, even though it is a traditional visiting and exhibition area for overseas people.
Yeah, that's fascinating, isn't it? I think it's just one of those things that it has permeated in some of the films that we love, but I'm not sure if people really make the connection. And of course, not in Germany also, you're absolutely right. And I think it's a very sort of something which we British enjoy because it kind of appeals to perhaps a kind of way of thinking. I don't know. Certainly MI9 thought that, you know, different cultures do think in different ways. Whether we agree with that or not, I don't know, but certainly that's how they base everything really on philosophy. And I apologise if my talk was a bit abrupt, but I was really conscious I should keep to my 20 minutes.
Great.
That's fine. Thank you. Yes,
I was going to tell you one story, if I may, just very, very quickly. This is one of the escape stories. I just love this. It's the obvious, really. There are two prisoners. It's not Colditz, it's one of the other camps. And the Germans have got them doing a little bit of work in the camp. And what these two in particular have got to do, they've got to paint the white lines down the side of the camp, all the way around, you know. And the guards, of course, each day they're painting this slowly in the sun and the heat of the day. The guards are kind of, you know, not quite kicking them, but just sort of, you know, laughing and joking and smoking and walking on. Well, of course, you know what they do, don't you? They just keep painting the line right out the gate and round the corner. And when they got round the corner, they ran off and they did make it back. And that's the kind of bonkers stuff. And one more anecdote, if I may, because I think this is one of my favourites. I mean, I'm reading the files just chuckling. With Major General Brummel, Tubby Brummel. He was called Tubby because he wouldn't fit down one of the tunnels. So what they decided to do is make a uniform for him as a German general. What would you make the holster for his gun. I mean, the guns they made out of wood, you know, they took the cardboard from the escape boxes or just the parcels that were sent into the camps with little goodies in. They would use everything. What would you make the holster for his gun? They made a mold and they made it from chocolate. The chocolate that MI9 had sent him for them to eat. They made it, and from a distance it looked perfect. And he got away with it. He walked out of the gate in German general uniform. But he did get recaptured, and you'll have to read the book to know why he got recaptured. But yeah, it's stuff like that. It's just magic.
Thank you. Anthony, you have a question. You have to unmute yourself. Zoom won't let me unmute people anymore. Only mute them.
Oh, okay.
Germany, France as a German officer. What was his name?
You need to unmute yourself, Anthony. That's it.
Can you hear me? Yeah.
Yeah, we can hear you now.
Helen, that was absolutely glorious. Thank you. And I'll cover you more in very thanks in a few minutes. But tell me, it occurred to me, this glorious and successful chapter in World War II, do you think it has any practical applications today?
Well, as a historian, I tend to mainly look primarily at World War II stuff. But I suppose, yeah, I mean, the world has changed in terms of technology, but perhaps some of the basic principles might be helpful. And I see a question came up on my screen. Does MI9 exist today? And no, it was disbanded at the end of the war. So MI9 doesn't exist. But the new head of MI9 at the end of the war, Sam Derry, he escaped from Italy, and ran an escape line from the Vatican, the so-called neutral Vatican. There's some very interesting stuff in my book on the so-called neutral Vatican that was supporting MI9 with funds. Anyway, that's a teaser. He became the head of MI9, and at the very end of the war, Churchill authorized him to found the territorial SAS. So it kind of has a sort of successor that, of course, they prefer not too much publicity about.
One wonders how this might have applied to prisoners who wanted to escape from Korea, say, or Vietnam, etc., with other problems. But perhaps the ingenuity is still there. Do you know what I mean? To create.
Yes. Well, there are. I didn't use it for this book because the files are just so huge. I had to contain the material. There is a chapter in my book on the Far East, but basically I had to contain the sheer volume of material. But you're right. There were escape lines in the Korean War. I can't off the top of my head know which unit sort of ran it because I didn't study it in detail, but I am aware there are declassified files now with a similar organization in the Korean War.
Okay. Thank you. Ian, did you wish to ask a question? Ian Bolcom.
Oh yes, sorry. Two things. Firstly, delighted to see you back again, Helen, and thank you for your fascinating talk. Like Brian, I went into East Germany just after the fall of the war with a friend of mine from West Germany. And when I saw Colditz Castle, I said, we must go and visit Colditz Castle if we can. And he had no idea whatsoever of the story of Colditz Castle at all. And I had to explain to him what it's all about. But there's no, as you said, there's nothing in German. The Germans just aren't either aware of it.
Of course, it was behind the Iron Curtain.
Yes.
And that might be part of, I don't know how Germany, now the reunification, of course, of, over 25 years ago, it's just, I'm not sure how history is studied there. But of course, let's not forget, and I think that could be part of it, yes, that Colditz, we tend to forget, was actually behind the Iron Curtain until 1989. So, yeah, that may be part of it.
It was about 1990, just at the time of the fall of the first time the West Germans were allowed into East Germany. We went on a road trip into East Germany, and that's when I saw it. But also, one of our members, who's sadly passed now, was in Poland. And in order to save his life, he told the Germans that he was a car mechanic. He had no idea what to do with a car, and ended up as a chauffeur to a general. And this general took him to a meeting and said, "You wait out here until I come back." And he left his greatcoat in the back, and he was very cold, so he put his greatcoat on, and then realized that as German soldiers were passing him, they were saluting him. He said, "Just a minute, if they think I'm a German general, everybody else won't." He just drove the car off and into freedom, as it were.
Yeah, some of the escapes were just quite ordinary like that, and opportunist. Yeah, and I think also I did mention in my talk, this is the forgotten Secret Service of World War II, but it wasn't until Yale, as my publisher, pointed out, this is the first book, a history of MI9 for 40 years. So I think these stories have sort of subsided and have been forgotten. And I did find that astonishing when they said, hang on a minute, you know, we're going to be publishing with you the first history of MI9 for 40 years. And so hopefully this will now shine a light and historians will do more, because there's so much more in the files.
Jackie Brown, you have a question.
Me. Oh, hello. Helen, my goodness me, you had me on the edge of my seat. Why were you not my history teacher when I was at school? Wow. Could you tell me, you said something here about we didn't abandon the Commonwealth personnel. Can you tell me a little bit about that?
Yes, so in the MI9 files, and the official war diary actually records how many, they call them escapers and evaders, so those that escape and those that evade, they list, and also British, American or Commonwealth prisoners, they actually list how many have made it back. So that's how we know proportionately. So yeah, all we can say is that if there are particular Commonwealth prisoners of war, their escape files should survive, and they would make fascinating reading. But wherever they were involved in action, then they were a priority too. And I love that whole philosophy, and it was one that was instilled in their training program before, because all personnel had this 3-week training before they went into action, because you can't assume they're going to know what to do if they're captured and disorientated. It was instilled in them, if you are captured, I mean, first of all, do not be captured, but if you're captured, remember, you are not forgotten. And that's really powerful, and that was true for all Allied personnel. And it is inspiring, and it's a little known story that, yes, we also looked after Commonwealth prisoners of war. Absolutely, they were treated exactly the same, and their safety and priority the same, the equality.
Thank you so much. I will be hunting down that book.
Thanks. Tim Moore. Tim, if you'd like to unmute yourself, please, and address your question.
Thank you very much for a very interesting presentation. I was in the British Army for 30 years, and I can tell you that a lot of the information you've told us today was actually known and used, because it did come from the secret files. And we used to have, from the time I was at Sandhurst in the 1960s, conduct under capture presentations, and they used to go on for days and days and days. And throughout my service, we did have those. So this is a follow-on to Anthony's question, that actually the lessons were being learned. But the other interesting thing, we also learnt lessons, the mental lessons, because many of those were not considered during the war. And it was only when people became, let's say, hostages, like Terry Waite, etc.,
yes,
that we began to look at the mental side. And I think there's this whole conduct under capture, what you do, both physically and mentally. And I think the mental side, it might be, as a historian, something you really want to look at, because it is really important.
Thank you. Yes, that's really, really helpful. I think the beginnings are there with MI9, in thinking that if prisoners could just, you know, get up to all sorts of stuff in the camp and keep healthy and alert and not just idle. But you're absolutely right. I think that's really, really important. And the game had changed, hadn't it, by the time of Terry Waite's time? I mean, horrific stuff. But yeah, thank you.
Right. If you want to ask a question, just unmute yourself. I can't, Zoom has changed the rules, so I can't unmute you. Just unmute yourself and you will appear up on my list here. Mo, did you wish to ask a question?
Yeah.
Mo, yes.
Well, yes, I wanted to ask a quick question. And first of all, say that was so fascinating, the whole talk, and incredible. I just want to know, following on from what one of our fellow members said, was this operational in Burma, especially the subcontinent? What was happening in the jungles there? And also, can we get signed copies of this book? Because it sounds an incredible read. Thank you.
Yes. Okay. So your question about Burma, it really would be worth you reading my chapter on the Far East, because you think, you know, MI9 could have just sort of begun to wind down after V-Day, you know, the whole stuff in Europe. But, you know, it's that whole philosophy that the prisoners, and we think about those forgotten soldiers in the jungle and stuff, but MI9 did not forget them, and that support was there right up until VJ Day, and the support was there before they went into action as well, so that if we knew that this particular battalion was going to the Far East, and it wasn't just Burma, then they had specialist training. They didn't just go through the ordinary training of escape and evasion, because of course it's a very hostile environment in the jungle. Survival's very, very different. I learned a lot. I thought to myself, my goodness, I really would not want to be stuck in the jungle. I don't think I'd make it. But you know, how to deal with the insects, the leeches, what you could eat, some of the medical problems. And very interestingly, the Japanese were psychologically also actually giving training to personnel and how Japanese that capture them might treat them, because to the Japanese at that time, capture was the most dishonorable thing ever, and it was preferable to commit suicide. So you got a kind of different psyche. But yes, it was also thought that the Japanese kind of didn't always worry about an escape. Unlike the Germans that would go looking for, they didn't worry because they thought there's no way they're going to survive the jungle. And there are wonderful stories of using elephants and the trails to help soldiers, you know, out. So it's a very inspirational story. Signed copies of the book, depends where you are really. I'm not sure about the logistics. Normally, if I was with you, I could have bought 2 or 3 copies with me. But yeah, I'm not sure how we can do that in this COVID. I can actually sign a book plate and send you. I know it's not quite the same with a personalised message. If you message me through my website, I can send that to you anywhere where you are. That's probably the next best thing, really.
Thank you. Thank you.
Ridian Jones.
Yes, Helen, thank you very much for that, which was fascinating. I've read some of your other work, and I think you've carved out a very important niche for yourself in this space. What my comment is really an observation rather than a question, and that is that anyone who has a Sky contract should be aware that there's a very good film that was produced based on a Michael Morpurgo book and issued this year about helping Jewish refugees, Jewish children, to escape through, it's called Waiting for Anya, and it's available on Sky at the moment. It came out only a month ago, and it'll give people an idea of how difficult it was to cross the Pyrenees, and how some of the French villagers in the regional areas were very supportive.
Yeah, I think that's a really good point. And I think, you know, when some of those escape lines and the families saw, I mean, they witnessed people being shot, they witnessed what happened, and still they helped. And you're quite right about the escape lines. The same escape lines were used to smuggle Jews out of Europe. And I do have something very early on in the MI9 book about a chap called Helen Fry, the American, and he was helping 200 Jews to get out on Eleanor Roosevelt's list. But of course, he helped much, much more, including like Marc Chagall. So you can read about that because he inadvertently ends up working for British intelligence. So that's a new revelation on Helen Fry. And from what I understand, I think it's still true that he is the only American recognized at Yad Vashem. So in the Holocaust righteous Gentile. But that's really helpful, thank you. And yeah, so we should all follow up on that.
Thanks very much. Unfortunately, everybody, we've run out of time. So President David, I hand it back to you.
Thank you very much, Nikolai, for looking after those questions for us. And thank you, Helen, for the way in which you answered them. But now it is my pleasure to introduce Anthony Newton to give, on behalf of our club, a very sincere vote of thanks to you. Anthony.
Helen, it's usually an obligation to give a vote of thanks and rarely a pleasure. This today has been an undiminished, undiluted pleasure for all of us today. It's been magnificent. When I was growing up in the 40s and 50s, of course, you heard all these stories, you know, from your families, from et cetera, and one grew up very excitedly fed on these stories. And then, of course, it grew to a bit of an anticlimax when you saw programs on television like Allo, and all sorts of silly things, you know. But nevertheless, that generation grew up on this. And so it's an incredible pleasure and delight to hear someone as enthusiastic and as brilliant as you talk about this and to produce your book. You've given us a wonderful lecture, which we'll remember for a long, long time to come. And perhaps one day you'll come back for a third bite of the cherry as well. May I ask you all to show your vote of thanks in the usual way.
Thank you.
Fantastic.
Helen, it is now my remaining pleasure is to present you virtually with your speaker certificate.
Oh, thank you.
Which will be sent to you digitally, if not postally, very soon. Thank you again. We're almost at the end of the meeting. I have now to announce our next speaker. Her Excellency Yamina Karitani, the High Commissioner for Rwanda, is speaking next week on fighting genocide ideology. I don't think any of us need reminding how damaging and destructive that ideology is wherever it takes hold, and any help or any support in fighting it must be worth hearing. I ask you to come back to hear Her Excellency Yamina speak to us next week. Nothing more remains for me to I am being reminded that something does remain, possibly two things. Is that the Stratford meeting, Nikki, you're promoting?
Yes.
There is a meeting, would you just, actually, Nikki, could you just tell us about it? Because I have the details, but I don't want to read out the Zoom connection.
Okay, no problem. Tonight, there's a concert at 6:30. It's held by Rotary Stratford and another few. It's called #Hometown, the digital festival, #8M46sec, and it starts at 6:30. And it's join the festival, please. It's about COVID-19 and the Black Lives Matter movement. So if you'd like to go along to that, check on the site of Rotary Stratford and you'll get all the details there. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Nikki. Much more clearly than I could possibly have dealt with it. So now we do get to the final toast of the afternoon. And that is, if everybody can charge their glasses, unmute themselves, and it is an important toast to all Rotarians. Rotary and peace the world over.
Rotary
and peace the world
over.
Thank you so much.
Thank you. Very good.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
Thank you.